Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to look at the changes to the landscape HLOD system in Unreal Engine 5.1 Preview 1. The good news is that it is working. The bad news is that the workflow is a bit clunky and it will probably change in the future. So if you're watching this in the future, there is probably a better workflow than what I'm going to show in this video. However, if you want to get it working now, here's what you want to do. First, we're going to create a blank UE5 project with nothing in it. When we get into the project, we need to make some settings adjustments here. You can see that it's telling us a missing project setting about shader model 6. We're going to come into project settings. We're going to search for SM6. And we're going to turn that on. And even though we're not going to use Nanite in this, it's actually set up to where this project doesn't support Nanite because it does not have the default RHI set to DirectX 12. So we're going to do that. That one took me a long time to figure out. I have no idea why 5.1 is setting it back to default and Nanite stops working. I'm going to restart, pull in the new settings. As you can see, we have no content here, but you can see that I'm showing the engine content. This is going to be important for following along. You're going to want to come here to settings and say show engine content because we're going to need a texture to play with. We're going to create a new level. Just call it test. And we're going to open it. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to add a few things. We need a directional light. We need a skylight. We need a sky atmosphere. And we need an exponential height fog. We're going to come into landscape. And we're going to create We're going to create a default landscape here. Let's go with 127 by 127 quads. We'll keep the 1 by 1 sections, and we're going to change this to 16 by 16. This will give us a 2K map with enough components that we can easily see what's happening. If we don't have enough components, we're not going to see it. Swapping out the HLOD sections, we're going to hit create. I made a mistake and did not pick a material, so we will do that now. We're going to come into the landscape. And we're going to set the landscape material. We're looking for the world grid. Let's see, it is called world grid material. And if you zoom in, we can see it's loading the world grid material. I guess it doesn't matter for this, but. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to convert this to world partition because this is not using world partition. So we're going to go up to tools, convert level. We're going to pick test. And now I want to show you an option here that is pretty useful, and it's called Generate INI. So there are some settings for this conversion process that then can also be looked at when you generate the HLODs. I went through all the source code. I spent days stepping through the source code and found out that it picks up this INI file and looks at these settings during the HLOD generation process. So what we're doing here when we check this generate INI file is it's only going to generate the INI file. It is not going to convert it to world partition, but then later we'll edit those INI settings and we'll come back, uncheck this INI setting that you see here, and then it's going to actually generate it. So right now I'm just going to generate that INI file. Okay, it opened up a folder directly to where it created this INI file, and we're going to open it in Notepad, and we're going to add a few things to it. Okay, so I'm going to paste this in, but we're basically adding an HLOD layer for this landscape. It's actually going to be the default for the whole map, but we're setting it up for the landscape. We're going to use layer type instancing. We're not using an HLOD builder class. We're saying, and this is the important one, is spatially loaded is false. If you set this to true, which is the default if you don't set this up, what will happen is in the distance, the HLODs will disappear. Well, that's not what we want. We want the landscape to always show. No matter how far you are in the distance, we want you to be able to see the landscape. And so we're going to say spatially loaded is false, which is going to make this loading range not do anything. And we'll just accept this default cell size. So we do need to set up a couple settings here. We need to set a folder for it to put the HLOD layer assets into. And then we need a default HLOD layer name, which this name you can see matches right here, default HLOD layer. Yeah, it's the first part of it here. It's matching that right there. See, HLOD layer underscore default. It matches. The rest of these settings look fine. We're going to save this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back here. And for some reason, it closed. It closes it. So we have to reopen it. I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like it's just generating an INI file. Why does it need to close it? Probably because it normally does when you do the full process and they just are running the same code. We're going to come back here and we are going to uncheck this generate INI. And then we're going to check run in place. Now, the reason we're doing this in place, and you might not always want to do this, but if you don't do the run in place, it's going to generate a new file, a new map called test_WP. And the code looks for an INI file that matches the name of the map. So if you were going to if you were going to do it where it's not in place, which is probably the safest because it saves your current level, then you're going to have to go back and rename the INI file to test_WP so that it matches the map name. I'm just going to do it in place. I'm not worried if I lose this when it crashes. It doesn't matter. It's just a test. And by doing that, we're going to be able to run that. Okay, so now we've converted to world partition, and we're going to come here and load our region. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is I want to show you what it does by default. So we're going to switch here to simulate, and you can see that it's only loading the ones close to us, right? There's this distance here under our world settings. If we go to this grid, it's saying the loading range is 25,600 centimeters. This is not what we want, right? We do not just want to see the small amount of landscape. So what we needed to do is we needed to start loading in. We needed to start loading in the HLODs, but we need to generate those. Now, this part I'm going to do here is something that you do not, if you're following along, you do not want to follow along with me, okay? It's going to take like 15 minutes to run, and it's going to not work, right? By default, if you just run through this process, it does not work. So don't follow along from this point. I'm just doing this to show you how it doesn't work, and then we're going to come back and I'll show you the right way to do it, which runs much quicker. So what we would do at this point is we would think, okay, I'll just go in here and hit build HLODs, right? Remember in the previous one I showed you, we had to run those commandlets using a script. Well, it's still running those same commandlets. It's just that they added some nice UI here to make it run easier. Do keep in mind that if you, and this was really difficult for me because I was trying to step through the source code. If you are debugging this and you hit the build HLODs, it won't hit any of your breakpoints. It actually shells out to an external process. So the only way that you can debug this is you actually have to go into Visual Studio and say attach to process. So that was a real pain to get that working. But here we go. Okay, it finished creating HLODs. So now we're going to take a look at what it did here. So it created an HLOD folder, and you can see that it created these static mesh HLODs, one for each of the landscape streaming proxies that were created during the conversion to world partition. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hit simulate, and you're going to see the problem. Okay, so this wireframe here that you can see, this is the landscape. This solid green that you see are the HLODs. And you might be asking, I expected to see a wireframe. Why is there not a wireframe? Well, it is a wireframe. It's such high resolution that it shows up as solid. If we could get in close enough, we would be able to see the gaps between the vertices. But if we were to do that, it would switch to a landscape and we wouldn't be able to see it. So basically what has happened here, and this is terrible, is that it has not generated an HLOD at the lowest resolution of vertices. It's generated it at the highest, meaning that our whole purpose of creating these HLODs to speed things up, we're actually making it super slow. Well, it's a simple scene, and this video card has no issue with it, so it's not terrible, but it's actually slower. It's actually slower than if we just had the landscape, which is obviously not what we wanted. The whole purpose of the HLODs was for it to be faster. So this is not what you want to do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the HLODs, and we're going to start over and do it the right way. So I can come into Build HLODs, and I can press the Delete HLODs button. So I'm going to remove them, and then we'll do it the right way. Okay, this is the part you can see here that it removed the HLODs. This is the part of the workflow I don't like. I'm hoping in the future they change this. They were doing it better in a previous version. In Unreal Engine 5, it was better. It had some errors, but it was a better process where they looked at what the max HLOD of the landscape was and tried to generate it at that. That code, it's not calling that anymore. The code's still in there. It never calls it. So I don't know if this is a mistake, or they're working on a new workflow, or they just need to write some documentation about something. I'm not sure. But here is what you can do if you want to run it right now and get it to work correctly. So what you do is you come to the landscape, and you will see that there is a setting called HLOD0 screen size, and the default is 0.5. And if I adjust this, you will notice that the landscape starts to have a lower resolution of vertices. Okay. Now what's going to happen is that the way the source code is right now at this moment in time is that it will generate the LODs at HLOD0, which makes no sense. But since we can control HLOD0, here's the workflow. We come in here, we change it to a lower resolution, we generate the HLODs, and then we change it back, right? So we got to remember that the default was 0.5, right? So we're going to change it back to. But we're going to come here and we're going to set it to say 1.5. This is probably larger than what you would use if you were really doing this, but this is for example purposes. The larger this number, the faster it's going to run. For this demo, it's going to work great. It's going to be easy to see. So now that I've done that, I've changed that to 1.5. Now I can come in here and build HLODs again. Okay, it generated the new set of HLODs, okay? And so now what we're going to do is we're going to hit simulate, and we're going to see if this one ended. Oh, I almost made a mistake. We got to go back and change the landscape back to 0.5, which we should be able to do just by using this reset. There we go. And we're going to save that, and now we're going to hit simulate. Okay, and now what you can see is it is working the correct way. What it's doing is this is the landscape, and it's correctly fanning out the vertices so that it matches. You can see on the edges here, it matches and connects to them. And so this is exactly what we wanted. There's not going to be any gaps. We can move around. It's loading each of the section as we get closer than the load-in distance. And now, no matter how far we go backwards, it's keeping our landscape in the distance. And so this is exactly what we wanted. This is the way that it always should have worked. The workflow's a bit ugly, but it is working. So it is now possible to use landscapes in Unreal Engine 5.1 preview and have the landscape HLODs generated properly. Now you may have noticed that there is this new section in Unreal Engine 5.1 preview called Nanite, and it does work. It's called Nanite Landscape. I'm not sure exactly where they're at with it, if there's any issues or not, but it is there. I have used it. It does work. We're still looking into it. I'll share more as we figure it out. We're still doing performance testing side by side, A/B testing, and trying to get a handle as to how that works. And we are concerned about potentially shadowing issues from that. So we're still looking into some of those issues. We also have been doing research on nanite foliage, and the initial results, they're really good on the rendering of the trees and the grass and all of that. It is amazing. The shadow side of it, it's not so amazing. So we're still trying to play around with some stuff there. The initial performance on the shadows is just going to kill us because of how the new shadowing system requires that the shadows are cached between frames, but when you use world position offset to animate any of the foliage movement with wind, it instantly invalidates all of the shadow maps, and your performance quickly drops down to single-digit frames per second. So we're still doing some research on that, and I will share that when I get it. If you have any questions related to landscape HLODs in Unreal Engine 5.1 Preview 1, please leave your questions in the comments section. Until next time, have a good one.